All right. I like that. It just gives me 30 seconds just to kind of get ready, you know? So I hope everyone's doing well. We are indeed beginning Matthew chapter 10 today, so still not halfway through the book, but we're moving. But last week, I don't know if you've kind of seen this, but the chapters, they kind of have they seem to have their own theme to some degree, right? As we've been going through them, like remember 5, 6, and 7, that was the Sermon on the Mount. And then 8 was where Jesus was crossing a lot of cultural boundaries. And then 9, we saw people crossing boundaries to get to Jesus, right? And so now in 10, if you were here last week, we closed with this, we were going to set an alarm, right, to begin to pray for workers, because the end of chapter 9 said, pray for the workers. The harvest is plenty for few, right? And so pray for workers. And so we're going to enter in. The chapter ends with this idea of prayer, and then 10 is going to open up with, all right, now what after we've prayed? So what we're going to see in this, and if you have a Bible, if you don't have a Bible, sorry, they're back there on the Bible table. You can have one, you can take it home, you can keep it, you can write in it, make it yours. But we're going to pick up in 10:1, and throughout this section, and even last week, there's this. Jesus is making what we call little Christs, all right? And you know what that's defined as, that's what a Christian, the technical term for Christian was little Christs, all right? And so that's really what, it was actually, it was a negative term when they used it, but you know, we've claimed it, and Christian. And so he's sending them out just as he was, and he's going to tell them to do the same things that he has been doing. And so Jesus has this rhythm within kind of from chapters 5 to where we're at now. There's this rhythm of Jesus teaches, Jesus demonstrates, Jesus sends, right? Teach, demonstrate, send. Teach, demonstrate, send. And that's really how we do a lot of training, right? It's like I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to let you do it. And that's what we're going to see in chapter 10. So let's begin verse 1. Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples. Now, is anyone actually looking in their Bible at the moment? Anyone? Yes. Do you have a mark? Is there a little mark by the Jesus? No. Okay. So in your Bibles, you most likely, some of you, there's this term that I learned. It's called explicitation. All right. So this is fun. So Matthew, remember, Matthew didn't write the Bible, or he didn't write Matthew with chapters and verses, right? It was just it was a letter. And 1,000 years later, we added these chapters and verses. And so the reason that matters is because last week's message this is a continuation of it. This is the same conversation, but for some reason, they broke it up and started a whole new chapter in kind of this, in the middle of a conversation on sending and mission. And so what they did is your original Greek actually doesn't say Jesus there. The original Greek actually says, and having called his 12 disciples, right? And so it's like, well, why would you add Jesus there instead of just leaving it that way? It was because they broke the chapter up, right? So they're like, well, we kind of have to know if someone just picks up at chapter 10 who we're talking about. So and I say this, I want to bring this up for two reasons. The one was obviously there's this continuity to the conversation that isn't seen if you just go chapter verse, right? If you go chapter verse, you kind of don't see the connections. But the other side of it was, when people tell you, people change the Bible, right? If the people change the Bible, and you can look at them and you can say, yes, it's called explicitation, right? And listen, when someone does something like that, they kind of challenge you, and you spit out a word they don't know, it's really disarming, right? It's like you kind of close down the situation. But the Bible does it. The people that translated the Bibles, they do these things so that we can understand it better, right? So explicitation means make explicit what is implied, to make it explicit, to make it known, to make it understandable, to see the whole picture. Okay, so that's what's happening with the start of this. It's the continuation of chapter 9. So then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples, and this is actually the first time that we see the disciples referred to as the 12, all right? In Matthew anyway, right? We haven't seen them mentioned like this yet. And so the significance here is that back in chapter 9, right, there was a miracle that Jesus did with the woman, or I'm sorry, with the leader who had a child who was dead. Remember that from last month? There was a leader whose child had died, and on Jesus' way, there was a woman that grabbed his cloak, right? And she had been bleeding, and she was healed. Now, do you remember how long she had been bleeding? 12 years. 12 years. And so when I mentioned it, when we went through it last month or whenever we did it, I wanted to bring up this number 12 then, but I couldn't figure out how to fit it in and make it make sense, you know? And so then when I got here, I was like, yes, I get to go back and talk about it. So the 12, right, is not, the number wasn't, it's not just a medical detail in that story. 12 in chapter 9, we're talking about, it was a symbol. 12 is also the number of the tribes of Israel, right? So there were 12 tribes of Israel. And listen, this is why it would irritate the Pharisees and the leaders when Jesus run around with 12 disciples. Like, they know what he's saying, right? They understand 12. We see 12, we just think 12. But with the Israelites, when they heard 12, or the Jews, if they heard 12, they go, oh, I think there might be something to this. There might be something about 12. There might be something that they're really trying to say. And so, it's the number of Israel's tribes and her long illness, right? So her illness, that 12-year illness, represents Israel's need for healing. And so when Jesus is doing this with 12, so the 12 disciples represent a healing of Israel, a renewal of the nation, that Jesus is doing the thing that the Jews were hoping the Messiah would do, bringing Israel back together. It's just not done the way that they thought it. So the 12, like these 12 disciples, right, they aren't followers. They are the sign that God is making his people whole and sending them to heal others. Okay? So, let's keep going. Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. Now that we know that this is a continuation of chapter 9, right? This is the same kind of conversation. Now we know that it shows us that Jesus isn't just sending out disciples or people that follow him. He is, again, like I said before, sending out little versions of himself, little Christ, little Jesuses. And so I want you to look at this exactly, because you can see it. So in chapter 9, verse 35, it says this: Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness, right? That's 9, right? And so look at 10 now. So that was Jesus was doing. So now look at chapter 10, verse 1, right? And at the end of it, it says what? And to cure every disease and every sickness. So in chapter 9, Jesus is doing it. He's doing the work, and has been. But in chapter 10, there's this shift, and that's why I think they put the chapter change there. Not because the conversation changed, but because the attitude changed. The shift of what it meant to be, what Jesus was doing changed. And so I think that's why we have the split of the chapters. And so when he calls his disciples, this is interesting. I think Pastor Robin will get a little bit more into this next week. She's going to pick up where I leave off. But when he calls the disciples, in Matthew, they don't mention calling them 2 by 2. But when we read their names, they're going to be mentioned in twos. So it's interesting because in the other Gospels, it says that Jesus sent out 2 by 2. And so you can kind of take that into this piece, but he does name them in twos. And the namings are really interesting. And I just had to eventually stop and keep going, right? Because I just wanted to I wanted to dive in like every name, but I was like, I would have been here another 3 months just on that, I think. You know, so I'm just going to go, a couple things I wanted to point out in the namings. So he names them in pairs. Verse 2. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Philip and Bartholomew, right? These are twos. Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. James, the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus. Simon, the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. And so there's a couple things that stood out. The first one is that Matthew uses the word first when he mentions Peter, but then doesn't use another number after that. It just says first is Peter. And so calling Peter first points out to his prominence as kind of probably the leader of the group, right? He was likely the leader of the 12, and we see that, right, through the papal succession. We kind of see that Peter was understood to be kind of the head of this crew under Jesus. But it's Matthew's way of saying, like, Peter stands out, but they are all called, right? Like, yes, he was kind of the head of this group, but they're all called to this. And so this is the kingdom way of leading, right? Prominence without dominance, right? Say that, prominence without dominance, right? And that's how this kind of functions, and that's how leadership should function. We don't always have great examples of that. We won't get into that. Every disciple is named, right? Every one of them is sent. And in God's mission, there's room for leadership without lording it over others. And in fact, I think it's in Matthew 20, whenever we get there, that they actually have this argument about, like, we want to be in charge. We want to be at your left and your right. And there's this whole argument, and Jesus is like, you guys don't get it. You guys don't get it. It's not about authority. It's not about being over someone, but lifting people up. And that's what leadership do. And you know that, right? You know that when you're working with a great leader, and I'll say this about Pastor Robin, like, she lifts me up, right? She allows me to do the things that I do, right? And so as leaders, like, it's like if we go around lifting people up, then I trust you. Trust me, people want to follow you when you're making people's lives better. And so I think that's part of this. And so there's a lesson in here on how leadership happens in God's kingdom, right? Peter never even declares himself like the kind of the head of the group. He doesn't do that. Matthew names him that. And so sometimes the best leader isn't seized, but it's recognized, right? Sometimes it's just recognized. Have you ever had a boss that was clearly not in charge? Right? It's like that kind of thing. Like, someone else is leading this thing, and we definitely are following them, but somehow this person is in charge. Like, we don't know. It's assumed real leadership is, you can't grasp it. It has to be given to you. And so it's about serving so well that when the moment comes, someone says, you go. We want to follow you. And so that's how leadership happens in the church. And so the other thing that really stood out, and probably my favorite part of it, when Matthew says his own name. So he lists, like, all the names. And so when Matthew lists his own name, after he says the tax collector. The other gospels don't mention it when they name the disciples. Like, John doesn't mention that he was a tax collector, right? Luke doesn't mention he was a tax collector, right? Mark doesn't mention, but Matthew goes, hey, you got to know where I came from. You got to know the story of the grace that I've been given, and I don't want to forget. And he doesn't say was a tax collector, right? I mean, he could have said that, Matthew, who was a tax. He goes, no. Like, this is a part of who I am, and so I want to go forward with my story, and I want you to know about grace and what's been given to me, right? That's what's happening with Jesus. I just love that Matthew did that. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And then Matthew gets paired with Simon the Zealot, right? And we talked about this before, Matthew and Simon, right? So you have the tax collector who was like the enemy of the state, and then you had the zealot who was like the enforcer of the state, and Jesus is like, you two go get it together. It's like, what? Why would you put these two together? Like, what's happening with that? And so the two people who couldn't be more different politically or socially, yet Jesus calls them both names, and names them both, and sends them both, right? And so the kingdom is not built on people who agree on everything. Right? It's built on people who agree on Jesus. And so it's a radical picture of unity. It's a picture of unity that only happens in the church. That when we can put things that aren't necessarily super important under the thing that is mainly important. Right? Putting first things first. So the church isn't supposed to be a club, right, for people who think alike on everything. That we can all just get together and just be, man, we're so glad that we agree on everything. It's like, that's not what it's about. It's not about any of that, right? And so it's about that grace is the glue that holds together people on opposite sides. The kind of unity doesn't just look impressive, it looks holy, right? And it's exactly what our world needs. Come on, somebody. We have so many people that disagree. And yet we have like but we agree on so many important things, and we just argue and fight. And I'm going to move. We're going to keep going. So Jesus builds his church not on the most impressive resumes, but on a dozen different stories, including failure, doubt, zeal, shame, and Judas, betrayal. And so the kingdom does not require sameness. It requires surrender, right? Not sameness, but surrender. So let's head back to our text. Ooh. So these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not take a road leading to the Gentiles, and do not enter a Samaritan town, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, when you first read that, you go, wait, what? Right? It's like, why are you being exclusive? Like, why are you excluding other people, Jesus? You're supposed to include everybody, right? And now Jesus is supposed to do the whole thing. So what is it about this that why would Jesus say, don't go here, but just go here? It's like the mission begins with Israel because they're the covenant people, like the ones that they were supposed to know who Jesus was, right? It's like, we should go to the people who are supposed to know who we are. And so we start with that. And remember, at the end of Matthew, he does tell us to go and do all the world, right? So this is a temporary mission for now. This is almost some kind of training, right, for these disciples. And so God's promise to bless all the nations runs through Israel. And so it's a focused beginning, not an exclusatory beginning. Does that make sense? It's about focus, not eliminating a group, but we are focusing on something. Because again, there's only 12 of them, right? It's like you're going to need a bigger crew, right? By the time you get to Matthew 28, you have a much bigger crew to go to all the world. So these 12 people are called to go to the Israel and share the gospel. And so I think there's an important lesson in that. And it's not just for church, but if you start a business, if you're in the world, if you're doing any of these things, there's this phrase that I really like is clarity of mission is more powerful than breadth of motion. Clarity of mission is more powerful than breadth of motion. So it's like you can do a lot of stuff poorly, or you can do one or two things really well. And so I think a lot of this is about focus, right? That's where lasers is just focus light, right? It's just when you focus, you get power, you get effectiveness. And so I think part of this is and what we need to do is like we could, churches, we can do all kinds of stuff and really not make an impact. But if we decided, man, we're just going to love this, like find a way to love this community, make a target and hit it, right? That's where church growth happens. That's where, if you're in a business, that's what you're going to do. You're not going to try to market to every single person, in your community. If you have a business, those things, right? So it's focused power. Clarity of mission is more powerful than breadth of motion. In Proverbs, Solomon says it this way. He says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no vision, the people perish. When the vision gets diffused or bifurcated, right, everyone starts wandering around. If we don't know what the goal is, right, imagine a football field with no end zones. What are we doing, right? You're just wandering around. You don't even know where to go. It's like, so you have to have a goal. You have to have something to aim at. And so Jesus doesn't send them everywhere, not yet. He sends them where the need is urgent and the hearts are ready or supposed to be ready. And so sometimes God's mission starts small so it can go deep. Sometimes it starts small so it can go deep. All right, so back to the text. So now we have a clear mission. Verse 7, Jesus gives, who likes clarity? I love clarity, yes. So this is a clear mission. On verse 7, it says this, as you go, right? As you go. So this little sentence is actually jam-packed. We probably do a whole 30 minutes on it, but we'll do 5. So as you go, right? It is basically saying, hey, this mission that you're on, this being a Christian thing, this Jesus following thing, it's as you go. It's as you go about life. It's as you do whatever it is you do, this should be a part of it. Mission should be a part of your entire life. What you do should always be about mission. And so, okay, good. Well, what's the mission? And so the mission is, anyone guess? It's the next part. Proclaiming the good news, right? So we know the mission is as you go, and then as you go, we ought to be proclaiming the good news. And I know people don't like this part, because what I grew up with was we really loved it when people said things like, preach the gospel, and when necessary, use words. Has anyone heard that? I know you're not going to like this. It's a bit of a cop-out. Yeah, I figured you wouldn't. So it's a bit of a cop-out. It is, because it is a proclamation. It is something that has to be said. So preach. Yeah. So Jesus has done essentially three things anyway. He has been proclaiming. That's what he was doing in chapter 4. That's what he was teaching in chapter 5, 6, 7. Right? Proclaiming the good news. And so it means everything he's been teaching and showing them, especially the Sermon on the Mount. The kingdom is God's rule and reign breaking into our world. Jesus has done these three things. So the kingdom of God is rule and reigns breaking into our world. It's the upside-down values of mercy, justice, forgiveness, peacemaking, all the stuff we took 6 months talking about, right? So when we say the kingdom has come near, right, this is part of the proclamation, that the kingdom has come near. What does that mean? That's because this is what we're proclaiming, right? Because if we're proclaiming as we go, you have to ask, well, what is it that we are actually proclaiming? Well, this is it. It was the next part, right? It's the kingdom of God has come near. And so when we say the kingdom of God has come near, we're announcing that God is making things right. You notice Jesus didn't say, go tell them about me? I thought that was really, really weird. I really thought, if you're like, what's the matter? Like Jesus would say, tell them about me. And he goes, tell them the kingdom's here. The kingdom's coming. All right? It's like this proclamation that the world is going to change and that we're a part of it. And we're going to change the world. So it's not a message about just going to heaven someday. Right? It's a message about bringing heaven to earth and making this place, this world better. And better for people that aren't doing well. And lifting people out of dark places. But there is more. What is that? But wait, there's more. I don't know what that's from. Verse 8. So he said, proclaim the gospel. And in verse 8 it says, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those with a skin disease, cast out demons. So it's like, oh, good. So there is a service piece, right? It's like, so we do have the proclamation, and then Jesus goes, yeah, okay, and he puts proclamation first, right? He's like, proclaim the gospel, and then go serve people. Proclaim the gospel, and then go serve people. And that's basically all of ministry. It's just telling people good news. We're going to change the world. The world's going to be so much better because of Jesus and what Jesus is doing with us. And then you just actually go and live it out. Like you go do the things as you go. You live out the gospel, not just proclamation, because they do go. Because if we've been to church, or maybe you haven't, maybe you've been here your whole life, but I've been to churches where it's just proclamation. Right, where it's just signs and angry people waving things and yelling things, and everybody's wrong and they're the only ones right. Like, I've been there. And then there's the other side, right, where they do a lot of good stuff, but no one knows anything about Jesus, right? No one knows anything about why we do it or what the goal is. It's like we're just doing good stuff. And it's like, it's both. It has to be both. And so let's wind this thing down. Verse 8. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those with a skin disease, cast out demons. And then he says this. And it felt off at first when I read it. I was like, this is a weird kind of jump. But it says, you receive without payment, give without payment. And I just thought, that's weird. It was a weird place to put that. And it took me a little bit. But it's like, what does that mean? And so you've received without payment, you give without payment. I think Jesus knows, I know Jesus, the reason Jesus says this is I think he understands that when he sends these folks out in power and authority, it's very human to want to try to profit. It's very human to take all these things Jesus has been doing, right? He's been loving, serving, healing, never taking a dime, right? Not taking money from anyone. He's just out there being graceful, being grace-giving. And so I think when we get out there, it's like so tempting to go, yeah, oh, I could maybe set up shop. I could just heal people. I could I'll start a hospital. I'll make money. I'll set up my family. And it's like, no, that's not what's happening. You're just going out to serve. You're not going to make any money at this. This is just about going out and doing it and coming back. And so I think that's the only thing I could come up with. There's this temptation. And when we do that, we rob people of what it means to really, truly be given something for free. And to really know what grace is like when you haven't earned it and you can't give anybody anything for it. Like, all I can do because of what I've been forgiven for is be thankful. I can worship, I can pray, I'll serve out of my thanksgiving, but it's not like I can earn it. It's not like I'm going to serve enough to where Jesus goes, now you've earned my grace. It's not it. So he sends us out. Jesus doesn't ask the disciples to do anything they haven't already seen him do. In fact, every command in verse 8 is a direct handoff, as if Jesus is saying, you saw me heal, you saw me raise the girl, you saw me touch the leper, you saw me drive out demons, now go do it, you're ready. This is the moment where discipleship turns into deployment. The verb that once belonged to Jesus now belongs to the 12. It's not a new mission, it's a shared one. And so what Jesus began in chapters 8 and 9, he now multiplies through his followers in chapter 10. And so listen, grace was never meant to stop at receiving. You're not just a receiver of grace. The ones who watched are now the ones who are sent. And so we are all little Christs. God bless you, church.